The most risk is what I've done 5 times. And Jordan's done a couple times, is buying that zombie mat or that free laundromat. you know, there is nothing free out there in this world. There's just a higher level of risk associated with what you're doing. Now, I've done it. Jordan's done it. We've bought them on the cheap. I've gotten one literally for free by just signing a new lease. And I completely agree with what Jordan said too, that man, that is typically the most risk, the most stress. Even when it works, it can take you 3 or 4 years to get to profitability. And sometimes, a lot of times, it doesn't work because just because there's an older laundromat there that can be retooled doesn't mean it should be retooled. And it's really difficult to understand those things. That's much more of an art than a science. And then the building new, that's its own risk, right? You're kind of, I always say you're kind of splitting the difference there because it's a big investment. If you're building $1 million laundromat, they're probably going to want 30 or 40% down in most cases. Um, and you're going to have, but you're going to have the risk of it can take 24 months sometimes to ramp up, right? And you got to have the cash flow or the cash on hand to be able to weather that storm. And the worst thing you could possibly do is build a beautiful laundromat that's going to be successful, and you just run out of cash at month 8, right? And you got to sell it for pennies on the dollar, or God forbid, go bankrupt or something like that. And you otherwise had everything right. You just didn't have enough runway. And so those are kind of the 3 ways to get into the industry. That's always how I break it down for newbies every time I talk to them, almost daily. And how should you make that decision? I always look at your available cash to liquidity, and look at that first and say, hey, if I got $300,000, 30, 40% down, here's a pretty rough idea of what I can go chase after. Probably can't get a $2 million laundromat, but probably can buy a $800,000 laundromat. And if you're starting like I did with very limited capital or basically none, then you're probably going to have to start by buying or acquiring a zombie mat. And it is read my book is all I can say, because it is not for the lighthearted, the faint of heart. It's an absolute gut wrenching experience. But the good news is, if that's where you are, then you can build great wealth. And that's why I wrote my book. That's an example of it. You can do great things if you're willing to do things that other people probably aren't willing to do or don't have the stomach for.